Non-alignment movement (NAM). The newly independent countries in 1950s, they did not want to be involved in either the blocs. There was an attempt to create one. The leaders of newly independent nations felt the need for a change from the insecure and tense situation. So in 1955, a conference was held at Bandung in Indonesia. It was the first Asia-African conference represented by 29 nations. The most important leaders for this conference were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt, Joseph Broz Tito, the leader of Yugoslavia. Pandit Nehru was acknowledged as the chief spokesperson. It paved the way for non-alignment movement. The first summit was held at Belgrade in Yugoslavia in September 1961. It was attended by 25 member countries. By 2012, the membership was grown to 120 countries with 17 observers. The first summit was a culmination of three major concerns: the cooperation among the members nations of NAM, most of them had newly emerged as free countries, growing Cold War tensions and its impact on the world at large, to prevent any of the newly decolonized independent countries from joining any of the military blocs. Over the years, the NAM helped countries like India to take an independent position when the two superpowers fell apart and pulled countries to their side. Growth of nationalism in the Middle East. In the West Asian conflicts, US supported Israel. So the Palestinians created a widespread feeling against the US in the region. The US also became unpopular because it supported undemocratic regimes in this area, so that the oil resources were available to the US and its allies. In 1968, a coup took place in Iraq in which Saddam Hussein came to power with the twin slogans of Arab nationalism and socialism. By socialism, they meant nationalization of oil resources and the use of oil revenues by the state to fund welfare measures for the citizens. Similar developments took place in Libya in 1969. These regimes combined welfare policies with autocratic and dictatorial rule of a ruler or a small group. They did not allow any opposition or democratic protest against themselves. In many cases, the opposition to the US and US backed regimes took religious colors. The nationalist forces, instead of supporting the idea of equitable distribution of wealth and opportunities, fostered the idea of establishing religious orthodoxy in those countries. A revolution took place in Iran in 1979 in which the old king of Iran, who was supported by US, was removed and new government jointly controlled by Shia Islamic clerics and democratically elected leaders was established. The beginning of 21st century witnessed growing discontent among the Arabs, which resulted in the growth of religious terrorism. Some Arab terrorists hijacked two aircrafts in the US and crashed them into World Trade Center in New York, killing thousands of people. This led to a war against Taliban and eventually to a war against Iraq. Peace movements and collapse of the USSR. USSR and USA came under the tremendous public pressure to roll back the arms race and destroy their nuclear arsenals. This forced them to hold talks to mutually reduce the stockpiles and weapons race, and eventually to ban nuclear tests between 1985 to 1991. This was largely made possible by the coming to power of Mikhail Gorbachev in the USSR. He tried to transform the politics of USSR by making it more open and bringing about radical changes. He was a liberal who introduced certain reforms for the revival of their economy and promoted healthy relations with the West. The reforms introduced by the open regime are often described as glasnost, and perestroika. Around the same time, the countries of Eastern Europe faced serious economic crisis and the USSR was not in a position to help them. As a result, popular movements demanding freedom, democracy, and economic reforms swept across Eastern Europe. Soon, the governments were unable to manage the country and collapsed. This is the best symbolized by the breaking down of the infamous Berlin Wall that separated Eastern and Western Germany and symbolized the unpopular control of USSR over Germany. In the USSR itself, the communist hardliners encouraged a coup in 1991 to remove Gorbachev from power. This backfired and Boris Yeltsin resisted the coup on behalf of the Russian parliament. He eventually won the presidential elections and announced the disbanding of USSR in 1991. The components of the former USSR became independent countries and many of them formed an alliance with Russia later on.